I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. To stay or not to stay, that's the question for President Biden following his performance at the CNN presidential debate last week. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call my smart friends and find out what's on their mind about the state of American politics. And joining me today is a very good friend of mine and someone I used to work with, Trent Duffy. You're going to hear more about our friendship in just a moment. But Trent formerly served as the White House Chief Deputy Press Secretary under the Bush administration. He is currently a partner at FGS Global and a wonderful father and a great husband and a terrific friend. So it's great to have you here. Thanks for agreeing to come on with me, Trent.
Oh, always good to be with you, Dana.
I mean, sometimes people are like, who are these friends of yours? So Trent and I worked together in the Bush administration. I think we probably worked on the Hill together at one point, too, though didn't know each other at the time.
That's right.
And then we used to, I mean, what time did we get to the office? 6:30 in the morning or so, I guess?
Or earlier, yes.
Earlier?
We were always the first ones there, and we would always go through the actual newspapers, sitting on the desk there before had the senior staff meeting at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
So
and we had desks, offices next to each other. There were small offices, and they had pocket doors that you could slide across. We'd leave them open, and then as we read the papers, we'd be like, "Did you see this? Like, can you believe that?" And I always have revered your thoughts, your opinions, your experience. It's so great. So I don't know what your weekend was like, talking to friends and family or people you run into in the street, but nobody can get over the debate from last week. It's still on everyone's minds. Like, I know the Biden team wants everyone to move on and think everything's fine, but that's not the sense that I got. What was your experience?
I think that's right. It has been top of mind for everyone. I mean, 50 million people watched it. That's a third of the electorate, and it's been the hot topic in cocktails, golf courses, you name it. Everyone's talking about it. And everyone agrees that it was a disastrous performance for Joe Biden, even Democrats, friends that, I know, and we've read about it in the coverage of it. You're right. They are trying to turn the page. And frankly, I have been surprised that the dam so far appears to be holding. I mean, usually, especially on the Democratic side, they're more apt to talk out of lanes and talk out of school. But so far, up and down the line, you see people falling in line. So, good for them that they're trying to hold this together. I don't know how long it's going to hold. Having said that, you got to imagine that any Democrat with eyes on the Oval Office has gathered their internal team and started thinking about an open convention, started thinking about putting the wheels in place for a campaign if they do decide, or if he does decide to resign.
It was interesting because, as you mentioned, there were some Democrats who put out statements like Barack Obama a few hours after the debate. Bill Clinton's came in around 5 p.m. on Friday. And they kind of said the same thing, like, look, everyone has a bad debate. I had a bad debate. Everything's fine. Hakeem Jeffries is saying everything's okay, but I get the sense that they're saying that and don't believe it. It does not seem authentic that they think it's okay, especially because, and I wanted your thoughts on this, sometimes when you read an anonymous source in an article, you can dismiss it. And other times you can say, oh, they're probably telling the truth. So 2 weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal had a piece written by two young women reporters. They had 45 different sources. Many of them were on background saying that Biden has slipped in recent months, especially even since the State of the Union. And the Deputy White House Press Secretary, the job you and I used to have, just absolutely takes a torch to these young women and says, basically said they are liars. Around that same time, the video from Biden was out of Europe, and the White House said those were cheap fakes.
That's right.
And then you had Axios over the weekend say, actually, all of that is true. And there are aides who are saying he's really only good between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. And I'm looking at this and kind of frustrated with the Biden team communications, both official side, White House, and on the campaign, because it feels like they've gone after reporters who are doing their jobs and trashing them when actually, who's the one not doing their job?
Yeah, exactly right. The Americans' distrust in the media has really, really sunk. I mean, look, go back to NBC with the RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel hire. I mean, it really has laid bare how partisan they actually are. The mainstream media has never been more partisan, even way more than when we were working for President Bush. At least there was some veneer of impartiality. That is long since gone. But this whole episode has demonstrated that you really can't trust what this White House says. And the proof is right there for all to see. I mean, for 90 minutes, the leader of our country was literally demonstrating that he's not running the country. And it's really shifted from a debate about, is he too old? But like, who is actually running the country? I mean, that used to be dismissed as this right-wing conservative talking point. But I think a lot of legitimate people have a rationale to ask that question, and you deserve an answer.
I know. It's almost like, how can you ask the American people for 4 more years when there were questions for me? Like, how can you be president today? And I say that with great respect for the office of the presidency.
Absolutely.
I want to respect my elders, all of those things. But I'm thinking, remember the 3 a.m. phone call ad from 2016? And this was, who is going to be the better person to take the 3 a.m. phone call when I was going to say the S words, going down, and the commander-in-chief has to make a tough decision. And when the news reports came out last night that there is an imminent terrorist threat against U.S. military bases happening in Europe right now, so everyone's on high alert, I kind of jokingly said to my husband, Peter, I sure hope that they can hold off until it's between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m.
Yeah. I mean, we joke about that, but it's serious. I mean, this is our country in a very dangerous time, both at home and abroad. And it is disturbing. And I think for a lot of Americans, like I said, especially those in the middle. I mean, we know we've been tracking this, campaign for months now and for years, and it's pretty split. I mean, it's 40-40, and then it's going to be the 15 to 20 in the middle. And the 15 and 20 in the middle are really waking up to this and saying, oh, the Republicans may not be as off base as we thought by claiming that this man who we want to respect, it's the office of the presidency, is not up to the job. And, even when they do make the decisions, they make the wrong ones. I mean, if you look at the issues matrix and see where Trump is up, on all the top issues that have always dominated American politics, the economy, the household kitchen table issues, housing, for my kids who are, trying to get housing in a tough environment, those problems aren't going away. What is interesting to me, Dana, is that usually when you have a challenger who is up by 10+% on all the issues, even the state of democracy, usually that person would be, in a commanding lead, 6, 8, 9 points ahead. And Trump's getting there. But that just shows that he still has a lot of work to do, and he can do it. But I think that he can really shift from like a campaign of vengeance to one of vision. And I think that's what Americans want to hear. Look, a lot of everyone's talking about Biden's debate night. Awful. Trump didn't have a great debate night either.
Right.
I mean, a lot of people were asking, they wanted to hear more. They wanted to hear his, views on childcare and some of these other issues that they care about. And now he has the opportunity to fill in those blanks. And he can and should do that now that he's got an open runway. I mean, I really think that he could benefit from running the reverse Rose Garden strategy from Mar-a-Lago, really acting presidential, have some high-level meetings, and start to demonstrate that he's ready to move in and heal the country.
That's actually interesting. I've been wondering for several months now why President Biden doesn't utilize his cabinet more. I mean, a cabinet meeting could be something, one, where you get everybody together. These are the smartest people that you have in your government. They're the ones responsible. So have a cabinet meeting. And that, one, brings all of them together. But also, it's a communications opportunity. You bring in the White House press pool. You say, here's the thing. I told them I am very worried about anti-Semitism in this country, and I wanted a 30-day action plan from each of them by next Monday or something. But they don't use them at all. Instead, President Biden this weekend went to Camp David with his family, and I thought, oh, boy, this is where they're going to have the conversation. But it turns out, no. They went there because they were having an Annie Leibovitz photo shoot. And then this morning, Jill Biden is on the front cover of Vogue magazine in a $5,000 dress with the headline on the front cover of the magazine says, "We will decide."
Right.
And then photographs of her on her way over to Europe, sitting in the president's chair with his jacket. All of those things are individual things, but they add up to a news cycle that is, I would say, if I was the PR people, I'd be under my desk. I'd say, I have COVID. I have to go home.
That's right. You wouldn't want to breathe today. I'm certain KJP doesn't want to either. And I think, didn't they have a cabinet meeting scheduled for this week, and then they scratched it because people were away?
Everyone's on vacation.
Everyone's on vacation.
Wow.
But you're right. I mean, it does create this limousine liberal out of touch. And, you talk about like the number one death knell for any politician, it's to appear out of touch. And what we've just been talking about, like with the denials that he is too old or, has the mental acuity to do the job, to what you're talking about with Jill, like, we will decide, you don't have a voice in this, Democratic voters. It all adds up, and it just supports what people fear most, is that Washington is completely just doing things against the will of the people, and that only helps to fuel Trump.
Interesting. My last question on this for this segment is, do you have any thoughts or want to weigh in at all on when President Trump and who President Trump should pick as his vice presidential running mate?
Sure, happy to. I mean, of course, we've got the convention in 2 weeks. I would expect that he will announce his pick prior to that. That's tradition. Not that President Trump does anything by tradition. But, we keep seeing the names of Governor Burgum and Senators Marco Rubio and Senator J.D. Vance. I honestly still don't think it's going to be one of those three. I like the Glenn Youngkin pick for a lot of reasons. Number one, Chris LaCivita, who is President Trump's senior advisor and an incredibly skilled politician, grew up in Virginia politics. He worked for George Allen. He later worked for the National Republican Senatorial Committee for Senator Frist. And the Youngkin pick, I think, would really represent the shift to the future. And I think that's what they can really benefit from most, because we could be talking about a 3-term election here. Of course, Donald Trump's second, and then potentially 2 terms of his successor. And that is a huge opportunity for conservatives to step into the vacuum and the division that has been created by the Democratic Party for the last several years, where all they've been trying to do is tear everybody down and not bring people together. So it's massive opportunity. I'd expect him to pick here, maybe as early as next week.
Do you? I don't know if you had a chance. The Wall Street Journal lead editorial today is headlined, "The Democrats made this mess." They created this mess, and part of the mess that they're talking about is that Kamala Harris is the vice president, who is more unpopular than Joe Biden. But apparently now, again, anonymous sources, but saying that she's frustrated that people talking about a brokered convention aren't just automatically assuming that she would be the heir apparent here. And Biden is maybe in a fix there.
Oh, they're in a terrible fix. And I think that is why the dam isn't broken yet, because I think replacing him would be even more detrimental to their party. I'm growing more and more of the mind that this is now becoming Trump's race to lose. And granted, he can still lose it. But the fracturing of the Democratic Party so close to an election would be, I think, just a blow that they could not recover from. And that's why I think they're resigned to the fact that they're stuck with Joe Biden. And despite everything that we've been saying, he still has a chance. I mean, abortion's going to be on the ballot. Their voters are going to turn out. I think a lot of them are going to come home. A lot of them are going to stay home, though. And so you have this weird dynamic where the incumbent, Joe Biden, has to really start running like a challenger, because he's got to fire up his base. He is really, really low amongst their, youth voters, African-American voters, Latino voters. These are blocks that they have to have in these swing states, and they don't have them right now. And they got a lot of ground to make up.
Can I ask you, because I don't remember, were you on the Bush campaign in 2000?
Briefly, yes. We were on the at the RNC for that.
At the RNC. So you weren't in New Hampshire when he lost to McCain?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I'm going to end on this little story for this segment. But part of this anonymous stories that came out this weekend out of Camp David was that there were family members in the Biden administration complaining about the senior staff who had done the campaign and the debate prep. And they were blaming really high-level people by name, saying they prepped Joe Biden wrong, and that's why the debate was so disastrous. And you contrast that with somebody like President Bush when he lost to John McCain in New Hampshire in the primary of 2000. It was a bad loss. They had won in Iowa, lost in New Hampshire, and everything was on the line. And President Bush writes in Decision Points, and I've heard it told firsthand as well, that night at 11 p.m., he gathered everybody at the hotel, and he said he knew that it was important to keep the team spirits up and working together. And so he said, this is a terrible loss, and it's my fault. And I want you all to work together, and I will do my part to make it better in South Carolina. And just from a leadership position from where you and I sat, I mean, it's just always so much more refreshing if someone takes responsibility and then charts a way forward. I feel like Biden's family was not doing him any favors this weekend with Hunter Biden saying, Dad, you must stay in the race. I mean, come on.
Right now his top advisor, which is unsettling to say the least.
Who was it that? James Carville said, Biden does not have advisors. He has employees.
Right.
And the difference is that the employees will always tell you what you want to hear. And we're going to tell you more of what you want to hear. We'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we are back with Perino on Politics. Okay, Trent, I wanted to ask something that I've always looked to you for, which is your thoughts about where we are in the economy right now. What is the truth about the economy? You have the Biden administration saying things are so much better than people realize. I'm very interested in, you have children in the age group that I'm interested in terms of how they're looking at the economy. I mean, they're trying to get their young lives started and get out of the nest and move on, but it's really difficult. And in adding to that, the concerns about the debt and interest payments, which I know you pay close attention to, how much do you weigh the economy when it comes to this 2024 election?
Number one issue. It always has been and always will be, because that's what drives people. And, you know, I hear all the same things that you do. And on some measures of the economy, like you say, unemployment is down. The economy is growing a little bit. But the way people are reacting to it, I mean, the economy for a lot of people is just paying $8.50 for bacon, which is absurd. And people are getting hit by that. It's the price they pay at the pump. And that's why Trump is destroying Biden when it comes to who can handle the economy better. And one issue we haven't really talked about too much, but it's huge, especially for younger voters. And I think this is what's driving a lot of the turnoff from young voters to the Biden campaign is housing. Mm-hmm. I mean, rents are up. The shortage of affordable housing, which is usually a Democrat talking point, as we know, is really terrible. So it's tough trying to connect the dots, and that's why I think they're in such a fix. And I think the other thing is that, you know, a year ago, there was still time. You know, the economy is what we call in politics, it's a lagging indicator because, as we all know from history, it takes months for voters to feel a better economy. And I think we're long past the point where even if the economy were to turn around tomorrow and start roaring and interest rates are, you know, the Fed were to somehow cut interest rates, which they're not, voters aren't going to feel that. So they've made up their minds on the number one issue. And I think it's overwhelmingly in Trump's favor for all of the things we just mentioned. But, you know, they've got some big challenges. Trump's going to have some big challenges. You know, they get tax cuts. There's a fiscal cliff in January when he could be in the middle of a transition. So it's not going to be easy. What
do you think about debt and interest payments and that sort of tipping point that Neil Ferguson wrote about a couple of weeks ago, saying that great societies do not survive when your interest payments start to be more expensive than your principal?
No, it's absolutely right. You know, our key metric when Mitch Daniels was director of the Office of Management and Budget for President Bush was the debt as a share of the economy. And that's growing. It's just at historical highs. It is a huge factor, and it leads directly to interest rates. There was the famous quote, we talked about the Clinton campaign in Carville, but, you know, he said he wanted to come back as the bond market because the bond market was more powerful than what they wanted to do as domestic economy. And say what you want about Bill Clinton, they did. They had to take steps to address the incredible fiscal imbalance that they were dealing with because it was the only way they were going to turn around the economy. And so there's going to have to be some very smart choices on fiscal policy made in the next term. As you said, the tax cuts expire. Trump has floated this tariff scheme, frankly, which I don't know how those numbers add up, because they don't. You can't raise that much money from tariffs alone. If you did, they would have to be so high they would be debilitating and really hurt consumers. So the economy is going to be front and center. But I think we do have some interest rate cuts coming, and that's going to help.
My last question in this segment for you is, without, I don't want to ask you to betray any confidences, but in general, because I know that you work with some of the biggest companies and the biggest thought leaders in America today. How do they look at the election? Is it like weighing heavily on their minds, or are they just trying to work as best they can to grow their businesses in spite of the government?
I think it's both. I mean, most of our clients, obviously, we represent the who's who of Wall Street and Silicon Valley and elsewhere. But they're realists, and they're planning for the next election. They would be silly not to. So they're looking at things like the tax structure. We mentioned the corporate rate potentially going up in a second Biden administration. Of course, that appears less and less likely that there's going to be another Biden administration or a different candidate. But they're planning, and you can see a lot more of corporate America shifting towards Donald Trump, frankly, because of all we've mentioned, that they don't feel like the Biden administration has been serving corporate America that well. The antitrust issue is huge for them. Not that Donald Trump would have a U-turn as it comes to antitrust, but the antitrust or the mergers and acquisition environment has been ridiculous, to say the least. In the past 4 years, we've seen the lowest level of M&A. And that's really important for companies to adjust to the market and respond and to continue to grow. So those are the things that we're hearing about from our corporate clients.
All right. We are going to have some more Perino on Politics in the next segment. And we're back with Perino on Politics. And Trent, this is where I like to ask my smart friends, what is something you pay attention to during an election like this, or that you're thinking about that I should have on my radar as well?
Well, I think it goes back to what's next. And as I said, Trump has the opportunity to really gain some ground amongst independent voters by being, and acting presidential. Like right now, there's not a formal transition team. It's probably too early for one, but I think you have some cadence and some sequence of events that he can really grasp and use to build that kind of momentum, that he's ready to come in and resume his prior role as president of the United States. Create the transition team, maybe even take a page from our old boss, President George W. Bush, by announcing some cabinet members in advance to show that you have a serious vision for the country. As I said, it's got to be more vision than vengeance. And he has the ability to do that. I mean, he was president. He has Mar-a-Lago. His people know how to have that stagecraft. That's important because Americans want to see their president act presidential. They don't want to see him acting like a schoolyard bully. And he's got to have this balance between firing up the base, which I don't think needs much more firing up. They're there.
They're locked in.
What he does need to do is reach out to the middle, to women in particular, who still have a lot of reservations, and they're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and they want to hear more. He can tell them.
Could you explain for everybody that's listening what you mean by a reverse rose garden strategy?
Sure. Typically, the incumbent is usually the only one that can run a rose garden strategy, and that means the incumbent has a lot of meetings, like I just described, from the White House, from the presidential position of power. And it gives the sense to the American people that this is the right guy for the right job at the right time. What we saw Thursday is the exact opposite for Joe Biden. He can't really afford to do a rose garden strategy because he needs to convince the American people that he's up to the job. And the rose garden strategy doesn't allow him to do that. Whereas with Trump, one of his biggest vulnerabilities is that he doesn't look presidential all the time. He gets too much into the mud, and people are sick of that. So he could run the reverse rose garden strategy and start just presuming that he's going to win. As I said, start to have some events that are less campaign rally, more policy focused on some of these issues we've been discussing: housing, cost of living, some of these other things. So that's
you know what's interesting,
a real opportunity for him.
Trent, they had President Trump do a bunch of policy-oriented videos that are on his website. It's really interesting because they didn't get much attention, but there's a whole bunch of them on policy, and sometimes they look a little stilted, a little bit. He's not ripping and roaring, like he typically likes to do necessarily, but some of them are pretty interesting. And at least it would be a place to argue. I wanted to ask you about, at least, I know you think a lot about taxes and things. I mean, even you can argue both sides of not taxing tips, but at least it was a fresh, interesting argument to pick apart.
No, that's exactly right. There's a lot of ground for them to cover, and it's a place for innovation. I mean, and you're right. He's got some very smart people. This is not 2016. Not to say that the 2016 campaign didn't have smart people, but he's got the benefit of some really good thinkers, and this is a time for him to showcase that, and not just on videos on the campaign website. He can get out. He can host these kinds of sessions at Mar-a-Lago with all the trappings of the presidency, with the desk, and start to remind people that he was the boss and he can be the boss and he wants to lead the country out of this morass that we find ourselves in. I mean, it's really a great opportunity for him, and I hope he takes advantage of it.
All right. I always ask one last question from the audience for social media. So, I mean, this is not necessarily that easy to answer, but I think it's kind of interesting. It's about the media. And since you and I both worked and still work in communications and different perspectives, this is somebody who follows me on X. He said, how does the press continually get away with gaslighting the American public? For example, he mentions Russia collusion, Biden's health, and COVID. What can be done to get the press interested in doing their job again?
Stop watching him, and that's what's happening. The mainstream media is completely suffering from awful ratings, and they are coming due. They're having the day of reckoning. So turn off the channel, change the channel to Fox News, right, Dana?
Yeah, sure. Come watch us here on Fox News.
Because we have seen this realignment, and that's because of the wisdom and the smarts of the American people. That's the greatest strength of our democracy. No matter what, even when the media was 25, 30 years ago, they were still way in the tank for them. The American people still went out and said, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we now have so many more platforms for people on social media and elsewhere to speak their minds and say, no, the emperor has no clothes. And to allow people to share their freedom of speech. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's why the mainstream media is in the dire straits that they are.
And believe it or not, listeners or viewers, if you're watching, the left actually thinks that the media is biased against them. And if you ask the Hillary Clinton team about the New York Times, you will get an earful. They hate the New York Times. So
yeah, that's right.
Bias is in the ear or the eye of the beholder, indeed. Well, I'm thrilled that everybody got a chance to meet Trent Duffy. And can they follow you anywhere? Are we looking for you on social media, or are we just following you when you get to come on here?
Just on here for now.
Okay. That's another reason that I love you, Trent Duffy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, great to be with you, Dana.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.